Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. It is Christopher Sebastian with Apex Advocacy, and this is our weekly live. And this time, we're not just coming to you from Instagram, we're going live super professionally. This is our first StreamYard. So if y'all are joining us, we are so happy to have you. Today is not just me gapping at all of you. I am joined by Yvette Baker, who is our executive director at Apex. I'm also joined by Jay Amaechi and Zehn Baskerville, and this is our live where we are going to discuss anti-veganism from the left, because all of us have pretty progressive politics in the mix, and all of us have been vegan for a while, and there's been a rash of videos on social media from people who are leftists, people who have progressive politics, and all of a sudden, just like veganism is coming out of their mouths and they're not vegan. And initially, we wanted to like invite some of them to talk to us, and we still plan to do that. I hope that some of them will accept our invitation to talk about their views on veganism, what they know, what kind of gaps in their knowledge they may have. Not even to convert anybody. We just want to make sure that people are as informed as they can be and have as many broad perspectives that they can that are non-white. Because most of the time when people are complaining about veganism, what we notice is that they're using a very specific subset of vegans and a very specific style of veganism and vegan activism that isn't representative of the global majority. Like the majority of people in the world who are vegan are non-white. The majority of the population of the world is non-white. And generally, when we're talking about these perspectives that people have, we tend to prioritize the overtly white and white supremacist framings of veganism and plant-based eating that are not really indicative of the reality, just because these people are the most visible in our sphere. And that's obviously, that's like algorithmically driven, right? So today, yeah, I'm talking to these beautiful people who have perspectives that I definitely want to hear more from. And so we're just going to jump right in if you are joining us. I'm going to start with I feel like there are like 5 buckets of criticisms or complaints or or concepts, whatever, that people generally fall into when they are making a critique of veganism. And I'm just like, I wrote these down and I'm going to read them out to you. And we're just going to talk about these. We may get through all of them, we may not. Let's just see what the day takes us. But I think that, like, number one, the framing of veganism as a diet, and people who are going about their vegan activism are frequently accused of policing people's food or policing people's dietary choices. Number two, veganism is classist because poor people can't afford to be vegan the way that veganism is broadly defined by non-vegan people, primarily on the left. Culture and tradition and indigeneity, and how vegan activism erases indigenous voices and indigenous people, and veganism as a somewhat colonial construct. Of course, the perception that veganism is white, and ableism, talking about why everybody can't be vegan. So yeah, that's the buckets. That's the buckets. I'm going to take it from the top. These are in no particular order, but I would definitely love to, just as a poll for the folks that are in the room, is veganism a diet? Yes, no. Zehn, let's start with you. Zehn, you were muted. Everybody come off of mute so that we can. There you go.
All right,
There
can
you
you hear
go.
me now?
Yes, I can.
All right. Is veganism a diet? No. Veganism is not a diet. I know that's a misconception. I hope not for the majority of people, but for me, veganism is a choice that's rooted in mercy. And for me, I don't want to kill animals. I mean, that's a simple explanation for that. But veganism, as I've always understood it, is the liberation of all living things. And so I don't know. I mean, you guys are going to probably tell me. I don't know how diet became part of the conversation. Maybe here's a theory. Vegetarian, right? So I think vegetarian is maybe where it gets messy, right? That's where it becomes a bit more nebulous when you start mingling those two terms together. But the origins of veganism, I think other people here can speak to more academically about the origins of that term. But for me, I started as a vegetarian. I later became more educated and understood what that meant as a limit to what actual liberation, animal liberation meant. Very ignorant as to what dairy and egg and all that stuff was. I didn't understand it. But the more you know and the more you understand, the more you can't separate those two things. And so for me, it's never been about diet, but for some, I suppose there's some confusion there. So I think education is really important.
My man, thank you. Zehn, what about you, Jay?
Oh, I have so many thoughts about this, and I'm going to try not to
share your
rant
thoughts
too hard. But I mean, every aspect of Western society has been commodified, and that includes our diets and how we eat. And so people are used to thinking of diets as like a product to be sold, like Atkins or paleo, as like these labels that inform their buying choices. And they're not really used to understanding how food can contribute to our growth physically, mentally, spiritually. And so, when a lot of other cultures and ancient texts and stuff, and they're talking about diet, they're not talking about a diet in these terms that like how like Western folks understand it in these kind of superficial terms. They're thinking about it as like what you need to live, not just physically, but also spiritually. And so like, I feel like the question is so loaded itself. Like, is it a diet? Well, what do you mean by diet? What is a diet? Like, if you think a diet is like Atkins, then no, it's not like a diet. It's not a product that can be bought or sold. If you think about it in terms of like, I've been researching and studying Ayurveda for a long time, and they talk a lot about diet, and of course, in talking about diet, it's not necessarily like, again, this product to be bought or sold, but like, how are you living in the world and what is your relationship to food? And so, if you're thinking about it as a superficial diet of like, okay, I got to restrict my food, then no, it's not a diet in that way. Like, I don't see veganism as restriction. I think that's one kind of misnomer, is people are like, well, it's so restrictive. And I'm like, well, do you eat dogs and cats? It's like, no, of course not. Well, that's not food. And I'm like, well, that's not food to me. So it's not restrictive if it's not food to me, like it depends on what your perception is of food. And so in that sense, like, it's not a diet. I don't view these things as food, just like not eating cats or dogs is not a diet. Those things aren't food, to most people. And so again, like I was saying, it's complex, and like, and it's a diet in the very general sense of like, it informs how I eat. But it's not a diet in this very superficial, commodified sense of like how people have come to understand like what diets, are.
But Jay, animals eat other animals.
God,
checkmate, Jay.
Not all of them. First of all, the strongest, biggest ones don't, like gorillas, elephants. They don't eat other animals, and so I want to be strong like those animals. But
no, but you raise like a really interesting and necessary point. Like the way that we talk about diet, the way that you in particular right now are talking about diet, is significantly different from the way that I hear a lot of people who are making, like, I'm going to assume good faith critiques, like, are talking about diet in the sense that like, oh, you are restricting what other people eat and you're policing people's food, when like the perspective that I hear you sharing is that like, we don't want to restrict people's food, but we have a different definition of what and specifically who food is, because we're robbing other animals, other persons that we share this planet with, of their identity. And the fact that like they are living, breathing, sentient persons who we share this planet with, and that's not like that's not food. I wouldn't think of someone else as food. Someone who has
another point on the restriction piece, ask the average American who loves meat, like what the diversity of their diet is. I guarantee they're eating the same 10 foods constantly, if not less.
The way that I was raised in North Carolina and did not know what hummus was until I'm embarrassed at how
and I'm like,
long
whose diet is restrictive? Like, I'm eating a smorgasbord of vegetables, fruits, grains. Like, you know, my friends are always like amazed and amused because I'm like, I found a new ancient grain that I'm gonna try, you know. And so, like, my diet is not restrictive at all. It is in fact abundant, and I'm proud of that. But it's just very funny because people are like, "Oh, isn't it restrictive?" And I'm like, "Well, I mean, I guess if you're used to like a Waffle House diet, then you know." But like, is that diet itself restrictive? I think so. Like, I think it's pretty restrictive to have such a small palate and to be so used to these like, you know, super rich, heavy foods that you can't be full off of vegetables, which is the case for like many people who have these like very meat heavy diets, and has this, of course, terrible impact on their health and all these other things. But like, who has the restrictive diet here? Not me. I do not have a restrictive diet in any kind of capacity.
It feels very restrictive though, like the non-veganism, because like to me at least, because when I think about the same 6 or so animals that appear on my grocery store shelf, like why are those animals in particular the ones that we primarily eat? Talking about myself as like a Western person living in like, you know, like growing up in North America, living in the United States. And like, you know, it's okay, so we've got chicken, fish, beef, pork, like, and chicken, we can expand that, I suppose, and say poultry. And we don't really stop to think about like why this very narrow set of animals that we have, like that we've decided are food specifically versus other free living animals, other domesticated animals. And that actually leads me to talk about one of the other buckets that we were discussing, like colonialism. Like, you know, the colonial aspects of like of the non-vegan diet, because so frequently we talk about like, oh, veganism is colonial because it's like it's forcing a lifestyle, forcing beliefs, forcing people to eat, quote, a certain way, framing veganism as a diet alongside paleo or keto or like Atkins or any of the other ones that you named, and not really thinking about the colonial influences that have created like our perceptions of food and shaped our perceptions of food. Like we didn't, like cattle didn't exist in the Americas, like North America or South America, until they were brought over by European settlers. And that's like, this is why we are eating these animals and why they're such an important staple of our diet today. And I'm really curious, and anybody can jump in and answer this. Like, you know, what are your thoughts about like framing veganism itself as colonial versus the coloniality of like, I suppose, non-veganism?
Well, I'm just gonna chime in super quick because this bucket and the last bucket are so important, and I think they're tied together. This is diet and colonialism is essentially where we never even get off the ground, I believe, in conversations with non-vegans and especially non-vegan leftists. Zehn, I think you kind of hit the nail on the head, looking at the term itself. Etymologically, it is coming from vegetarianism. It is derived from the 1940s vegan society wanting to distinguish themselves between those who were consuming eggs and dairy and other animal derived products. And so, and we reinforce this. We just do. We have to be so for real, as they say, about it, right? We talk about veganism as a consumer movement, as a diet all the time. And it's out there in the world. It's just, that is what it is. Here's the vegan menu. Here's the vegan options. We're always talking about something that we buy and consume. And we know in this room, and for the purposes of our work, that we're talking about animal liberation. That's what we're talking about. So without really revisiting that point and really getting to the place where we have this basis, a very basic level understanding that yes, you can actually follow vegan principles without actually, because of whatever circumstances you have, without having to 100% adhere to a quote unquote vegan lifestyle, which by the way, nobody can. We live in a non-vegan world. So there's just some really baseline, I think, understandings that we just drive past real fast, and try to have a conversation, or worse, a debate. And we're never gonna meet in the middle. We're never gonna find the common ground. But Sebastian, you just asked about colonialism, and I think you made a lot of really important points. Everything you said about interrogating why these animals are here, why these systems are here, and I would add to that also like what they have done historically and what they continue to do. You know, these operations, these animal exploiting industries also displaced lots of indigenous peoples. You know, we were an obstacle to be able to build out these systems, and we were exterminated, right? And in place of cattle, and to build these operations. So the defense of these systems, this industrialized animal agriculture in this way, is so anti-indigenous, and it's defending colonialism, I think, unbeknownst to the person who is being so anti-vegan. And we have a lot in common as far as our decolonization efforts, but I think we're talking to a lot of people who haven't really considered these things and haven't really looked into the history of how these systems were built and why we exploit these animals in this systematic way, and who these industries affect most on top of the animals. You know, who it is, whose communities are sitting next to all the toxic waste of factory farming, which, by the way, you know, is how 99% of meat products or animal products are come to be on the shelves in the United States, right? Because everybody, of course, then backpedals and says that they consume only only free range and local and sustainable and all the things. But you know, that's really remarkable that we can only find the 1%. And at that, we don't even interrogate those ideals in the ways that raising animals in this more ethical way would require them to live much longer. These animals that we're breeding into existence in the first place and don't need to be there, but they would need to live much longer. They would need to consume more resources. This is not sustainable. This is not a reality for over 8 billion people on the planet. I will end with this. I'll just say that we are not in a pre-colonial past. And as indigenous folks, we do always adapt, and we always can move and guide and evolve towards the future. And I think it would really behoove anyone bringing up indigenous peoples to listen to indigenous peoples who are pushing plant food systems forward, and who are understanding of the principles of veganism, and who do regard our beyond human relatives with the respect and reverence that we always have, because this is a very different world. So where it makes sense to evolve and not consume animals at all, this is what a lot of us are doing and working towards and talking about. So don't pretend like we're just living in the past and we're not here right now in this room and trying to battle these issues alongside everybody else.
Can we talk a little bit more about Zehn? Go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to add to a bit, like, you know, when you say these conversations, we don't even get off the ground. You know, that resonates a lot with me. You know, what makes this tricky often, and I think everyone here knows this and relates to it, is that when the colonial way, the dominant system, becomes internalized and now translates within our community as our own identity, that's where things get really tricky, right? So the way we eat now, or a large portion of our community, the Black community specifically, we begin to identify as the way we eat, the dominant system that has been given to us as our own identity. And this becomes part of our culture. And when you're up against that, it makes conversations really, really difficult, because it's not all of who we are as Black people, as Indigenous people. But it's how someone who you may be talking to identifies, and getting them to expand beyond that identification, understanding historical context, can feel like a very defensive or offensive a conversation to have, to where they then put up the shield and armor. And it's not my intent. I know it's not anyone's intent on the call when we get into those conversations. It's not an offensive conversation. It's a conversation to expand our aperture beyond where we currently are and understand the broader terrain of oppression and how it works and the food politics that have been given to us. And so I have found, I don't know if any of you have the answer or solution to it, but I have found that to be a very, very difficult conversation to enter into and create the necessary space and comfort for us to reason. But it's a challenge for sure.
Yeah, it is a challenge. But I also feel like we're making a lot of there's a lot of change that's happening in terms of people waking up to the realities. And I mean, Black women are the fastest growing vegan population, in the US. And I hang out with a lot of Black women that are becoming vegan, that are trying to become vegan. And a big part of that is because, yes, we were able to turn literal scraps, literal waste into delicious food, like heritage wise. Yes, that happened, but that food is killing people. And people have seen their relatives with, limbs having to get amputated, dying of heart disease at 50 years old. And they're starting to recognize that, yes, our resilience in being able to turn literal garbage into cultural dishes is something in a lot of ways to be commended, that we were able to do so much with so little. And we don't live in that reality anymore. So we don't actually have to eat the food that's killing us, And so I think that in general, I tend to avoid kind of the health approach when I'm talking about these things, just because it's just, I don't actually care that much. I'm you know what I mean? I'm kind of a junk food vegan in a lot of ways, but also I'm noticing that when I'm having these conversations with other Black women who grew up very proud, often of their Southern heritage or their Caribbean heritage, with a lot of these meat heavy staples that are coming from slavery, eating the parts of the animal that the master didn't want to eat. And you can still be proud of that resilience and not eat that food. And I think that is a lot of what people are waking up to. Yes, we were able to survive the worst possible thing and make it into a culture that we're proud of. That doesn't mean that we still actually have to partake in, these devastating foods, because we've seen the devastation on the communities. We've all seen it. Most Black people have people in their family who have hypertension, high blood pressure, diabetes, and a lot of that is coming from eating, these foods. And more and more people are recognizing it, and more people are waking up to we got to do something different. And my family's from Jamaica, and Jamaicans, yes, they ITIL diet is a thing. My parents aren't Rastafarian or anything. They ate very meat heavy, and for a long time they were just oh, you and your stupid vegan thing. And then when my dad and other family members started to get older, and hypertension started to become a thing, and diabetes started to become a thing, suddenly the vegan versions of the mac and cheese and these other things didn't sound so crazy. Suddenly people were like, maybe I should give this a try. And then when they did try it, they were like, oh, this is actually good. This is not bad. I would definitely eat this, and so I am noticing a shift that is happening specifically in the Black community. And of course, there's always going to be folks who are just going to cling to what they know, what's comfortable for them. And maybe not, there won't necessarily always be those kind of folks, but I think that group of folks is shrinking and shrinking every day, in my opinion.
And shout out Sebastian too. What you're saying, Jay, is so important. And I'll just end it with a book recommendation, because I'm assuming we have a lot of vegans in the room. And I think understanding different cultures' deep histories and ties to food is very important as a serious animal rights activist. So Sebastian put me on a couple years ago to a book called Building Houses Out of Chicken Legs, Black Women, Food and Power. And that book, I finally got through it, was really incredible. And so these are some of the things that I think it would be really smart to equip ourselves with as we're coming up against, okay, but culture. Okay, and we try and dismiss it. We try and take the bullet pointed Earthling Ed tips and say, okay, but culture doesn't justify morality, and you think that that's all done and done. No, we really need to understand, fully understand, if we're supposed to have these conversations. So just wanted to add that. Back to you, Sebastian.
Oh my God, like no notes for that because like that's like I forgot about that book. And by the way, I think the name of the author of that book is Psyche Forson Williams. Let me look that up right quick. If you ever get a chance to hear her speak, she is the most phenomenal and arresting like speaker. And
yes, I don't know how to pronounce it. Psyche A. Williams Forson.
yes, Williams
Yes,
Forson. And
Williams Forson.
and that is an incredible book, and it is like it's definitely a tough read. Like it's dense, but I got so much information out of that, and I think it is so important to understand because when we talk about culture, we talk about it in a very flat, one-dimensional way. Like this is my culture, this is what my ancestors had to do. Why? Like what were the circumstances, the social and cultural and economic circumstances that led us to have to do this, and we're so fond of saying that like slavery is not Black history. Like slavery was an interruption in Black history. And yet so many of us like center our cultural experiences on that racial trauma of slavery and what we had to do during those times. And never interrogating all of the traditions that came before that or what traditions we want to form after that to still honor what we had to do and our resilience, like Jay said, but do it in different ways. And it is wild knowing that, like, yeah, Black women are leading these like culinary revolutions and adopting plant-based diets at a rate that has been unseen in ages, and outpacing so many other demographics in the United States. And that's something I think to be proud of. Like that's a reforming of a conversation around tradition and culture that I think is just incredible to watch. I did want to talk about like just one of the things that like Yvette had tangentially brought up. Actually, everybody talked about this a little bit in some capacity or another. Like, we moved through so much in very little time, but like ableism, like the ability to eat a plant-based diet is not available to all people at all times. Are people still vegan if they can't eat a like exclusively plant-based diet all the time? I'm gonna ask Zehn.
Ableism. It never occurred to me that the vegan diet was unavailable to anyone. I think what happens is you do have dominant systems that come in and create barriers and lack of access in structural ways. But as a concept, veganism is available to everyone. I think what people weaponize is this idea that that if you take on a vegan diet, then you become disabled. That there's a disability to veganism itself, and that seems to be a hard thing to overcome. But access to vegetables, access to good food, it structurally can be a challenge, and that's all by design. And usually what happens at the root of that is the taking away of land, right? So land theft, removal of land. You don't have access to land being the main subsistence for people. And then when you take away access to the land, you now have a problem. You don't have food. And this is where the market now comes in. People who love to say that market is the solution to everything. Market always has a solution to everything. So the market creates the condition where you don't have land. And then it says we don't have food now. And it says, oh, here's the market. We have a solution for that. But there's a catch. We have food in the market, but it's going to cost you money. And you say, well, we don't have money to purchase your food. Oh, we have a solution for that too. Now you can come work for us and earn some money to buy the food that we took away from you. And now there's just a structural barriers to where access to food becomes an issue. And so this is where we have to start thinking about alternative ways of existing, and moving away from individual ambition to more communal living and mutual living amongst one another, so that we can create alternative systems that live alongside these dominant systems. And so we have to be more intentional about that, whether that's community gardening, co-ops, things like that, where we can start to live more intentionally sort of address some of the challenges that we face as individuals by coming together as a community, so that we do have the access that we need, or we're creating our own access. So that's what I think about when I think about veganism as, either being available to people or not being available to people. There are structural challenges, but I think we just have to think more communal about it.
Jay?
Yeah. Oh my God.
You look like you had something to say, so I wanted to.
I lost my train of thought for a moment. So, can you remind me of the question one more time?
The question is are people still vegan if they can't adhere to a plant-based diet
yes.
at all times?
Okay, so the one thing that I feel like is really important to bring into this conversation is the fact that the standard American diet is a mass disabling entity. And that's something that is never brought up in these conversations. It's like, well, what about the disabled? Well, what about the fact that the meat and dairy industry is literally disabling and killing people on a mass scale?
but Jay, that's all people can eat. That's all they can afford. You trying to take that away from them. People have to eat food.
That is like never brought into the conversation, even though this is not like a vegan conspiracy theory. This is something that like doctors and people that themselves eat meat, researchers have shown time and time again, is how consuming meat products and dairy products the way that the US diet does as a norm is extremely harmful to your health, and it causes like serious like disabling conditions. So like number one, there's that. Number two is, for a lot of folks, they're actually coming to veganism. And again, I bring up Black women because, that's my people and that's, who I try to surround myself with. And a lot of Black women in particular are coming to veganism because they've seen like how it's actually helps people like with, and there's there's research still that needs to be done on this. This is not something that's necessarily set in stone 100% as far as the science goes, but there's been, studies that point out that, in terms of like reducing fibroids and different things and like different very common ailments, like for Black women in the community, like a lot of them are turning en masse to veganism because they've seen how people have actually been able to heal a lot of their disabling conditions through a shift away from the standard American diet to like a diet that is like plant rich and plant based. And so it's actually, I would say like, it's actually in a lot of ways the opposite. It is like in a lot of ways it's healing more people from disabling conditions than it is actually, preventing disabled people from like becoming vegans. And at the end of the day, every single person is different. And there are people, I'm sure, that there are a couple folks out there that cannot, go vegan because of, whatever conditions that they might have. It also depends on their social environment, because if they're in an environment where it's like, okay, you can't have any processed food and, the only unprocessed food is meat, then of course, then you're going to have to, eat that meat because, you're not in an environment that has fruits or vegetables that are unprocessed that you can have access to. So a lot of times it's a question of access. And so the problem of access is systemic and something that's done intentionally, and it's something that can also be fixed. And if there are some people whose bodies are just, the way that their bodies function is that like they have to, for some reason, it seems very unlikely given the normal dietary requirements of a human being. But, if there are a couple people in this universe, in this world who for some reason cannot eat most vegetables, cannot eat most grains, and they really have to stick to, a meat and dairy diet, like those people are very, very few. And they're being tokenized as if it's like this like huge population, when it's very much the opposite. It's very much like the standard diet is disabling people en masse, and the folks who are disabled who can't really get into a vegan diet, it's usually because of like access issues and like what is available to them, which again, like I said, can be fixed. So I mean, I guess I would just like push back entirely on this narrative that like, oh, this is something that is like, extremely impossible for disabled people. And of course, cooking is difficult, and we live in a society where a lot of folks are eating, like I said, processed food, or they're eating out. And if you cannot cook and you're reliant on restaurants or other people, then yeah, actually it could be very, very difficult to be vegan as a disabled person. But again, that's a question of access. And again, questions of access can be fixed, and that's not a reason not to go vegan, if that makes any sense.
It makes a lot of sense to me. And I personally would say that, yes, people can still be vegan even if they cannot eat an exclusively plant-based diet all the time, simply because veganism isn't a diet. Not to me. Talking about the broader social, political, and philosophical definition of veganism. This is not something that is restrictive. And the hyper-focusing on diet of vegan activists, and I will, just like Yvette said, we have a lot to answer for. We're responsible for doing a lot of this ourselves over the past 30, 40 years. It's unfortunately put us in a position to have to answer that question. If we understand veganism as a socio-political and philosophical construct and not as a diet, then yes, people's politics are available to them at all times. Our politics can't be taken away from us, even when food access can be and has been, and it is weaponized in that way. And since Jay have touched on this, we have about 5 more minutes. I just want to talk about the classism argument as well as the ableism argument, because those are two halves of the same whole. Because if people can't eat based on their social or economic location, or their physical inability to eat an exclusively or even partially plant-based diet, a lot of arguments are made that oh, well, people don't have access to a plant-based diet, and so therefore veganism is a non-starter for them. So yeah, I live in a food desert. I don't have access to healthy plant-based options. Am I still vegan if I or can I still be vegan if I can't eat that way because of these factors that have to do with economics, transportation, just my social situation, my family situation. These are the classist arguments. That's one question. This is a 2-part question, but does anybody want to jump in and answer that?
Yeah, I mean, I would say that like you said, it's an ideology more than it's a diet. And also, looking at the systems again, the cost of meat and dairy is artificially low. It's low on purpose. It doesn't actually reflect the true cost of the industry of the food itself. It is subsidized because there is an industry that lobbies the US government that has a lot of power in order to get subsidies and a lot of these other things to make these things artificially low so that they can keep consumption high. And the price of that is the literal destruction of the planet, And so let's talk about how the price of the food itself, the price of meat and dairy, does not actually reflect the true price of the food. And if people were actually paying the true price of that food, it would be completely unaffordable to the vast majority of people in the US, which is exactly why these things are subsidized, which is why they have, these industries that lobby for these subsidies. It's why farmers in general, get so much subsidies. And a lot of these subsidies are corn and soy, not because they want to grow corn and soy, but because these are animal feeds that they need to create. They need to grow a large mass of in order to feed, these factory farms and stuff like that.
And this all sounds well and good, theoretically, felicitaciones, my sister, for explaining that, why meat is so cheap. But I am poor, right. I'm in a food desert, and I can't eat vegan right now. And and so now this is now I have vegan advocates saying that I'm I'm a bad person, or I should be vegan anyway. What does veganism look like for that person who doesn't have that that access, that financial or like the economic or the like, you know, or the social access to being able to eat a plant-based diet.
Yeah, and you know, I mean, I bring up the systemic stuff because, you know, talking to, I'm assuming that the audience is somewhat, you know, vegan or into vegan activism, and it's on
Absolutely.
us to make these, like, to fight these systems in order to make the food more accessible, you know, because if the access is not there, then like you know, folks are going to eat like what is available to them, and you know, like you said, you know, you can still ideologically, you know, believe in veganism in that way and still, you know, consume animal products because there's like, it's, if it's that or starve, you know, then most people are going to eat something. And like, you know, it's on us, you know, as activists to like notice the system and do something about it in order to create more access. Because as someone that does work in food systems policy, when the access is there, people do eat it, and they want the vegetables, they want the things, the, you know, the like things other than, you know, meat and dairy. But it's like, you know, when you go to the food bank, or when you know, yeah, like they send you like the government cheese, and they send you all these, like, there's all these products that people don't actually want, that they would actually prefer in a lot of ways, you know, the you know, the fresh produce, but it's just not available to folks. And so, you know, I mean, there's a lot to be said about, you know, there are definitely affordable ways to, you know, eat, you know, in a vegan way and all these other things. But again, you know, it's an ideological thing. It's not necessarily like a diet. And the diet is in response to the sort of like ideological understanding. And if that ideological understanding is intact, then I think that, like, at least the folks that I know, the broke folks that I know, you know, they're like, it's a value of theirs, and it's very important of theirs. So they still do the best that they can, but that's all that we can ask, you know, is like do the best that you can in terms of, you know, trying to align your ideology with your actions. Like, you can only do what's available to you, and like, you know, that's all I can ask of people, is to like do what you can. And maybe that doesn't mean perfection. That doesn't mean that, like, you know, you have to do things in a specific way or a certain way. You know, it can mean that, you know, you consume products that like might not be vegan because it's the only thing available to you. But the goal is to eventually align your ideology with your actions, you know, like that is the goal. And if you're working towards that, you know, as far as I'm concerned, you know, you're vegan, you know. But if you're one of those folks who is like, well, I want to be vegan, I agree with it, but it's just it's just not possible, or it's just too hard. It's like, well, I'm like, well, you know, you're not really vegan then, in my opinion, because if it's an ideology, then, you know, you strive to align ideology with your actions, understanding that, you know, perfection is not possible.
And can I just endorse? Can I just endorse what Jay said? Working towards it. It's you. Part of it is you do have to be upset enough with the system that has been given you to resist it, and part of that is changing from within if you want to see the change from the outside. And it means part of that is being upset enough about, this is the current condition that has been given me, and I want to actively resist against it. And when you begin to actively resist against it and actively work towards something else, solutions start forming, and you're actively pursuing them rather than just accepting the condition that you're in, accepting the system that has been given you, because that's what the system relies on, your complacency. It relies on you just accepting that this is the system that you have. And you have to actively create different systems. You have to actively do that. And if you do that, you can work towards it. You won't do it overnight. But as Jay says, you work towards it and you actively pursue it. And but some of that is you do have to take offense, a little bit of offense, to what your current condition is and why you are in that current condition. Get a little upset about that, because it's actively working against you, and you have to push back.
Sebastian, too. I'm obviously, we might go to the hour. I don't know if that's okay with everybody. We're probably at our ideal time. So I won't add in too much here, but if that's okay, if everyone stays. I am overwhelmed. I have so much to say, and these conversations are ongoing. We need to isolate all of these pillars and have deep dives and put them out for the world clearly. I will say that too, I think it's really important to say this, especially for all the animal advocates. We really do need to take food apartheid seriously, especially for those taking that approach, trying to veganize people, which is a whole other issue. And I know that this term food desert had come up a few times, and I just really want to be intentional with this, because I think the reason why a lot of us are moving away from this term is what Zehn spoke to about this not being a naturally occurring thing, that these are intentionally structured systems and realities. So taking that into account, what people are experiencing and what they're using to push against veganism is situations of food apartheid. Even in theory, even if that's not their own reality, they're going to borrow it and say, well, some are living in this system and some can't do it, therefore I won't either. That's a whole other issue, but I really want to name that. And also, Jay, you had spoken to, the outcome and why we're propping it. What are the ramifications of being complicit in these industries, and you spoke to the planetary devastation. And I would also say this is also very much contributing to all of the economic imbalances, the power imbalances, in the ways that, like, dairy industry, 99% white owned. We're not really even interrogating like who we are defending and what we're tearing down, in not being in solidarity with human rights and with people of color and marginalized communities when we defend these systems that, again, do not just devastate animals, but have so many negative ramifications for us. And it's not that we need to do them in better ways, it's we need to not do them at all in this situation and this planet with this population and this many people. We have to reimagine something different. And on another note, we can just look at the science. We can look at the science about plant-based food systems and methane emissions and what we could do and how we could be as a planet to survive if we were to move to a plant-based food system. Eat plants and wear plants would have to be part of the picture as well, and that's a whole other conversation with the textile industries. But back to you, Sebastian.
No, like the textile industry being adjacent to this, that's like such a big deal, because like I think that like recognizing that talking point itself is major, because it really sits alongside all of these other discussions, because there is such hyper focus on food from non-vegans and from people who are vegan activists, because that's where it is. But like looking at what we wear, who we wear, how we treat animals as products apart from food. And like, that's like such a dangerous and incredibly devastating industry as well. Like I do want to talk about that more, but like Yvette said, we're pressed up against time. So I'm just going to ask one more question before we wrap it up. And this one comes because I've watched like 5 videos almost back to back of people who were leftists who champion very left politics, Marxist people who are socialists, like just the whole spectrum of leftist anti-capitalist politics, make a statement that is so devastating to me. At the end of all of their videos, they all said it almost like this was a written talking point. I don't think that it was, but almost as if it was written. They all said, I will talk of some variation of this. I will talk about veganism, or we can have a conversation about veganism after insert other oppression here. After this is taken care of, after everyone has food, after there is no more racism, after there are no other, quote, more pressing problems to solve, then we will talk about veganism. And I find that to be so devastating to me, because that statement invalidates all of your other work in such detrimental ways, because not only do you turn into like an almost right-wing extremist by saying something like that, it also makes solidarity transactional. I will only do this if, and then you have to have to fix all of these other problems, or all of these other problems are already off the table, which has never been how any type of justice has been achieved, whether it's racial justice, queer justice, like, you know, like environmental justice, like any type of justice. And I just want your closing thoughts from each one of you, like how you feel about that statement and whether or not solidarity is something that is transactional.
That's so devastating. That's one of the most devastating things I hear, and I don't think that they really even believe what they're saying in that. The gotcha there really, of course, is that returning, not adopting a new view, but returning to the view of other animals as nations and as persons with individuality, with their own agency, as oppressed beings, comrades of the working class, as not separate from us, does not add another problem to our plates or detract from human rights. It's the collective liberation work we're doing. As you said, Sebastian, as you alluded to, it strengthens what we're doing. It tremendously strengthens what we're doing. And I can say that as someone who has been in movements of human rights for 30 years, and then bringing animal liberation into my work. If you're really actually doing the work, if you've been doing the work, you know that it always helps and always clarifies and always deepens to look at any issues holistically and with an intersectional lens, always. So we can obviously have an entire discussion about all the ways in which animal liberation is an integral piece to these puzzles. Like, you don't actually achieve these elements, you don't actually solve these elements of human suffering without considering that we're not an isolated species on this planet, that we are part of the ecosystem. But we don't even need to really go there. We really just need to look holistically at what we're doing and what we're saying. What Bell Hooks said, you know, the soul of our politics is our commitment to the end of domination. If that's true, if that's really true, then what are you doing? I'll let somebody else speak.
I don't know who's going to talk after that, though, Yvette. I don't know, because I don't even, no microphone here. Dropped. Who wants to follow that up? Because now I'm emotional.
I second that, Christopher. That is, I appreciate everything Yvette said. I'm only going to add to it in that, you know, when I hear arguments like that, it comes off to me, I mean, it sounds as if people are simply arguing for a higher position within supremacy, within structures of dominance. They want a higher position within that. They're okay with others having been oppressed. And I think what they fail to recognize is that, you know, as we say collective liberation, there's collective dismantling as well. So when you dismantle one portion of the system, it weakens the entire system. And those same systems that you're dismantling also impact you. If we continue to proceed with industrial animal agriculture and destroy the earth, we are destroyed also. We don't survive that. And so it's this inability to connect a complete picture of how oppression actually affects us, and recognize even our own interests. I'm not motivated by my own interests, but for heaven's sake, if you're going to make these arguments about liberation and everything else, at least understand the totality of that, the full terrain of it, and how it actually impacts you. I am certainly motivated by the freedom and liberation of all things, just because spiritually that makes sense to me. But absolutely, there's a self-preservation argument that can be made about this if you understand the complete picture and how it works. And it does not care about you as an individual. It is going to exploit everything, and to the detriment of everything. And you'd be wiser to understand that, the intricate pieces of that, the mechanics of it. And because when you do, you strengthen your own argument. So integrate the knowledge of all these different movements, because it strengthens even your own position. And I've learned that from Silco and some of those others that speak about this. I've learned that from Yvette. I've learned that from you, Christopher. But it's important. Understand these other movements. It strengthens your own argument, your own understanding of how your own movement works. And without it, you do yourself a tremendous disservice.
Yeah, there's so many things I could say about this, and so much amazing things have been said already that I don't necessarily want to repeat. But I just think it's funny that a lot of these folks, who might be like anti-imperialists, whatever, when they hear the Democrats say, we'll deal with Palestine at a better time, are just completely outraged and angered by that, and will say these things are all interconnected. But when it comes to veganism now, we'll deal with veganism at a better time, not realizing that they sound exactly like, MLK's white moderate that is trying to, create a timeline for the liberation of all beings on this planet. And, and create like a hierarchy of when we deal with one issue or another, not knowing that, realizing, as has been said already in such an eloquent way, that these things are all interconnected. And especially I'm a Marxist, so I get into with other Marxists. I'm like, how are you going to be a Marxist and not recognize one of the most destructive industries on the entire planet for humans, for animals, for the environment, for all of these things, and actively and willingly participate in this industry and in fact defend this industry? Like, what kind of Marxists are you? And so that usually shuts them up. But it's not necessarily about shutting them up. It's about them realizing that these things are all interconnected. And if we do not change the way that we consume in general, but especially when it comes to sentient beings, and I'm not just talking about animals, also talking about people, because these are systems that fundamentally also, because the humans and we are animals, and our fate on this planet is deeply interwound with the fate of all other animals on this planet. And so it's not just like you're saying, Zehn, it's not just harming, the planet. It's like there's a self-interest piece to it. But beyond that, it's like it's fundamentally, this is about industries. This is about power and confronting that power in order to redistribute that power. And if folks aren't I think that a lot of folks don't necessarily understand that or recognize that. And so it's easy to make an argument about we'll deal with that later, not understanding that this is about confronting power. And there is no later when it comes to confronting power. It has to happen now. It has to happen today, because revolution cannot wait. Liberation cannot wait. It has to happen today, every day.
Also, how dare us? I didn't think this would be an emotional question, Sebastian. I really appreciate your response, Jay. I really appreciate your response, Zehn. And of course, non-vegan white folks frustrate me, but people of color, especially, how dare us? That we know so intimately what it's like to be stripped of our personhood because of our perceived lack of intelligence, because the bodies that we're born into, we have these very painful and resilient histories and ongoing struggles, and that we can so callously deny personhood to other beings that we deem inferior and impose this violence and suffering on them just as we experienced and still experienced. How dare us is always what I want to say. We know better. We should know better. There's no excuse.
I think we do know better to a certain extent. When you, again, look at the numbers, and there's 3 times as many, but percentage wise, in terms of the population, 3 times as many Black women who are vegan than white people.
Why I always take that, I hear that, and I always take it with a little bit of a grain of salt, because I know that, we are looking at those statistics from a dietary perspective only, and unfortunately in those stats, vegetarians did get lumped in there, and we really don't account for the temporary nature upon which people take on diets. It's still remarkable. It is still saying a lot. Don't get me wrong. I don't mean to dismiss it. I just want to name that we had and we'll continue to have more conversations about Black veganism and about wellness culture and this movement into dietary and community health. But oftentimes, it is very much divorced from liberatory and leftist politics and from liberation. It is more of coming from a place of sometimes hyper individuality, but also just kind of community wellness and health, which is very important, but a bit different from what I mean when I say vegan.
And we got to come back and have more conversations about that.
Yeah.
I'm just going to wave the flag and say that that's
wonderful.
That's a deep dive that we really should get into at some point, because I am so frustrated, heartbroken, saddened, not discouraged, but honestly jaded a little bit about what I see happening in the Black community. And I'm struggling to fight that jaded fear. It's a struggle. There's a tension. And there's a deep dive we can take there. I'd love for us to get into that at some point.
Y'all heard it here. Zehn said that he's happy to come back. So now we got it on camera. To me, that's as good as putting it on paper. And now, so don't be surprised if in a couple of weeks we just say, hey, Zehn, hey, Jay, we loved having y'all on and we would love to see you again. We have so many more conversations to have. But right now, that's all the time that we've got. So I'm just going to say thank you to everybody. Thank you to Jay Amaechi. Thank you to Zehn Baskerville, and thank you to Yvette Baker. I'm Christopher Sebastian, and this has been Anti-Veganism from the Left with Apex Advocacy. We will look forward to seeing all of y'all next week again.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.